Hello, welcome to We Speak. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I ask everyone. What is a belief that you hold very strongly? Something that you believe to your core, something you feel like you should have believed all your life or you have believed all your life?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Aaron. And first of all, I want to thank you guys for having me on today. Good to talk with you guys. Um, One belief, which I would hope that I would have had throughout the entirety of my life, and that I seek to actively spread, is the idea that individual rights ought to be protected in society. Um, and there's certain derivatives of this. Number one being that we ought to extract initiatory force from society, i.e., we ought to allow exchanges to be voluntary. And on top of that, we sort of get on a more meta level, we understand this concept of individualism, this idea that the wills of the individual are more important than the whims of the collective. And collectivism, by contrast, is the inverse, that the wills of the individual are subjugated to the whims of the collective. So I suppose that that sort of rejection of collectivism, and sort of in place, we put this protection of individual rights, this more individualistically minded mentality, this idea that the individual is the standard unit of value.
So you say that the individual rights are to be protected. What do you mean by that? What legally or non-legally can we do to help those rights be protected?
Yeah. So specifically, I think that it's important here to conceptualize a little bit what we mean when we say individual rights. And what I'm referencing is sort of, I suppose, the more Lockean interpretation of rights, which would be the rights to life, liberty, and property. But I think that Rand actually does a better job contextualizing this, because I don't think that these are natural rights. I don't think these are rights that were granted by God. I think that these are rights that are derived from who we are essentially, um, the necessary preconditions for man's survival qua man, or as a man. Um, in a legal sense, in terms of actually implementing this, I believe in something called objective law. It's been written about in rather great detail by authors like Tara Smith and Ayn Rand. This idea that we essentially outline very clear standards of what man is and what man is not allowed to do in society. And the punishments are pre-outlined so that before any man acts, he knows what is and what is not allowed, and he knows what sort of punishment he would incur for performing an action that is socially deemed improper, or sort of deemed an initiation of force. That's the standard of morality in my society. So yeah, I think that in my ideal world, the sole role of the government is to protect individual rights, period. So essentially, they're tasked with having a police force, a military, and a judicial system in which they process legal cases. And so there's certain objective mechanisms like the courts, like the objective law, that are put into place that allow for the guaranteed protection of individual rights.
So you talked a little bit about collectivism versus individualism. We had another person on who talked about collectivism in relation to communism and socialism and how individualism relates to capitalism. Do you believe in capitalism more than the other systems because of your belief in individualism, or do you swing the other way?
Um, yes, so I think that they're sort of mutually advantageous to one another. So I think that capitalism is based off of individualism, and I think that the logical conclusion of individualism is capitalism. I think it's sort of like a cyclical relationship in that way. Um, I would say that the hierarchy for me goes reason as the paramount value, uh, and then individualism, and then capitalism. Capitalism is sort of that physical implementation of reason and of individualism, individual rights. I guess if you want me to go a little bit more into collectivism, was that your question? So collectivism, as I see it, by the way, I don't know why I'm holding scissors. They were in my drawer. Um, Collectivism, as I see it, is the doctrine that the will of the individual ought to be subjugated to the whims of the collective. And I think that what actually delivers a rather deafening blow to this doctrine is the idea of methodological individualism, the idea that the individual is the standard unit of value. What is a collective? A collective is not an entity. A collective is not really a unit. A collective is a conglomeration of individuals. So you sort of have to reduce it back in that regard. Collectivism is evil because it subjugates man to slavery in many regards. I think that the collective operates as an enslaving force. If 51% of people in society will something, does that mean that the 49% can be trammeled? No, I don't think so. I think that that's wrong. And I think that historically speaking, we look at the Weimar Republic, we look at Nazi Germany, sort of the Weimar Republic as the precursor to Nazi Germany. We look at the Roman Empire. We look at Greek city-states. We look at late 1700s America. I think that it's rather clear that where we have individualism and we have doctrines that impose the protection of guaranteed individual rights, we see freedom, we see liberty, we see prosperity. And where we see collectivism in places like Nazi Germany, in places like the USSR, we see travail and tribulation and hardship and hunger. And I don't think that this is coincidental, nor do I think that it's strictly a correlation without any causation. I think that it's rather clear that certain doctrines motivate certain evil outcomes. And I don't think that it takes a genius to analyze which is which.
You talked about how if 50% or 51% of people will something, the other 49% should not have to deal with that. Does that mean that you are against direct democracy as a concept?
Yeah, absolutely. So I view direct democracy as sort of a political manifestation of collectivism, one of the many iterations that exists. But direct democracy, if it were to be applied to its furthest logical bound, an individual who believes in direct democracy would have to concede that if 51% of people vote for something that that violates the 49%, they should not be against that. And I think that if they are against that, they don't really believe in direct democracy. If democracy means that the means utilized to achieve certain ends of society are set by the majority, then why would the majority not be allowed to choose the disenfranchisement of the other 49%? I think the problem with direct democracy is that there's no doctrine, there's no mechanism, there's no means of actually guaranteeing the protection of not only the rights of the majority, not only the rights of the collective, but of the individual, the minority, the subjugated, the servants, if you will, in this instance. And I think that a book that does an excellent job explaining this is the Federalist Papers. I think that the Federalist Papers were a collection of rather revolutionary essays. And again, sort of giving this historical concrete, the United States, though certainly an imperfect nation, and there's certainly flaws with our Constitution and the implementation and interpretation of our Constitution, we're pretty darn close. We're the closest that probably anyone's ever come to a proper government, to a rights respecting government. And to sort of solidify this a little further, if I may, the founding fathers came up with this idea of the consent of the governed, and it's very misunderstood today. People think that it means that every rule has to be consented to by every individual. It's absolutely not true. And when you read the Federalist Papers, this comes to be very apparent. The consent of the governed was meant to represent a reversal of a very specific hierarchy that had existed historically. Historically, under systems like feudalism, under systems like we had with the English, under systems that we had in France, even in parts of Russia historically, the people served the king, the people served the government. And that was the very thing that led to Thomas Paine writing Common Sense in the 1780s, or excuse me, the 1750s, 1760s, which was that we did not like serving the British king. We very much so despised citizens being held accountable to the king. What the founding fathers wanted was a reversal. We wanted the government to be responsible to the people. We wanted the government to serve the people, not for the people to serve the government. So I think that that's sort of another concrete that illustrates the vision, the innovation, the forethought of the founding fathers, that sort of just goes back to our whole original point of individualism being the most ethical, most virtuous, and most most reasonable system that I think we can implement in an ethical sense.
Just a side question. You had a book of the Federalist Papers there. Do you have that book everywhere in your house? And why?
So no, I don't keep the Federalist Papers with me at all times. I do have a little app on my phone that has the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and the Declaration of Independence, just in case I have to ever pull it up. I keep a number of books on my desk, just for quick reference that I find that I talk about a lot. And then my bookshelf is back there. I don't know if you can see, but we've got a couple books there, a couple up there, and then a couple in my closet. One
Cool looking
couple,
bookshelf.
couple hundred, I guess I should say. But I like to keep some books behind my computer for quick reference.
Thank you for taking my sort of silly question and turning it into something actually interesting. So you talked about the success of the American government, how you think the American government is the best implementation of what you believe in. What about representative democracy to you makes it a better system than the direct democracy and the things that we see in other places in the world?
So I think that one thing that I would add is that I do think that there are certain shortcomings of the current political system. I think that there's certain ways that I would rewrite the Constitution, which is hard, right? I mean, the founding fathers were alive in great part before the Industrial Revolution. Certainly of the later stages of the Industrial Revolution in the 1870s and 80s and all the way through the early 1900s. I think that a constitutional republic works so well because I think that it is a fine balance between the understanding of consent of the governed, where the government serves the people, but also an understanding of rationality and objectivity in the sense that rights are non-negotiable. There exists a constitution, but on issues that don't pertain to rights, there is some level of servitude from the government to the people. But I think that that's why the constitutionality portion is so important. Rights are non-negotiable. There's no such thing as consenting to have your rights violated. Same reason that I'm against the secession of the South. And a lot of the anarchists that you'll talk to on TikTok today, who are anarcho-capitalists and radical secessionists, they'll tell you that secession of the South was a good thing. They'll say that their state rights were not being respected. And this is one of the grave flaws, I think, of anarchist thought these days. There's no such thing as a state right. A state is not a conscious entity. A state cannot have a right. People have rights. And if you're seceding to form a new nation that doesn't respect individuals' rights, you're initiating force. I wish that the North would have bombed the living hell out of the South as soon as the Civil War started, because what they were doing is non-negotiably wrong. What the South was doing had nothing to do with states' rights. And even if it did have to do with states' rights to do what exactly? To violate the rights of the individuals within the state? No, you don't get to secede and start your own nation so that you can violate individual rights. This is why the Constitution is so important. And if I may add one quick point, it's actually, in part, there's important context here. The reason that the founding fathers didn't include slavery in the Constitution, because they knew that they had to found the nation first. If they squabbled over slavery at the beginning, they would have never established our republic. So that's sort of, I think, one illustration of how the Constitution, I think, in many ways should be rewritten. Not like judicial activism, people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg who are like contextualists or crap like that. No. But I do think that there's something to be said for certain amendments that would drastically improve the implementation and sort of the principles behind the Constitution.
Talking about rewriting the Constitution, how do you think that we should do that? Do you think that we should vote on it? Do you think that we should elect people to vote on it? That was to be a big change to our central government system. So how do you think we should carry that out?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that the honest answer is I'm not sure. I don't think that we're there yet. I don't think that we're at a place in time where I can give you one correct answer to that question. I think that the point remains that there are certain revisions that ought to be made to the Constitution. But I think that I'd have to get back to you on the means by which we achieve that end, right? I don't think that we're currently as a country in a place where that's a legitimate possibility. I would say that a political leader would have to do it, right? Like a state leader. I don't think you could just vote on it because I reject democracy, right? Like I think that really all it is recognizing things that already exist in a metaphysical sense. These rights that exist qua man, preconditions for survival qua man, things that we need for survival, not man-made constructs, but things that we need in our essence, in our nature. So it's just a recognition on an institutional level of those rights. So it's not like you're voting on what's included. It's just us going back and saying, hey, look, we now have a better understanding of what individual rights are, how they ought to be spelled out in plain English, and how we're going to go about implementing these individual rights and securing them for the people.
You talked a little bit about how we are not there to a point where we can rewrite the Constitution. When do you think that we will be there? How can we get there?
Good question. I think that right now in society, we've reached a point where collectivism is so widespread that it's not even really known by name anymore. People hear collectivism and they have no clue what that means. I think that there needs to be this rude awakening of how evil collectivism and altruism and rejection of objectivity truly are. Because they are, they're evil doctrines that are against man in nature, in essence. So I think that in that regard, the biggest thing that we need is a devotion to rationality, a devotion to the law of identity. That which is, and that which I want it to be cannot be unless it truly is, right? A is A, no changing that. I think we have to accept things as they are. I think that in many regards, we've placed our own whims and our own feelings about how things ought to be above the things that truly are. I think that that's an important step. We need to reinstitute sort of the sanctity, the importance of rationality through the means of logic and reason, which is our only tools of really understanding things that truly are in existence. I think another portion is the more ethical component. I think that we currently, on a macro level, hold very weak ethics. I think that in many ways our society has, I'm not even going to say deteriorated because I'm not sure we were ever there. And that's sort of like a typical paleocon talking point of, oh, degenerate society, such and such, whatever. I think that people are very altruistic. Very few people are operating in their rational self-interest, acting selfishly, which is a good thing. Or sorry, to explain further, being selfish is a good thing. Operating in your own rational self-interest is a good thing. And I'm actually writing an op-ed on this right now that will be on my Medium account, hopefully by the end of next week. So yeah, I think that we need a devotion to the law of identity, right? Rationality, that which is. We need a devotion to truth over feeling or whim. And I think that we need sort of a more concrete system of ethics.
You talked a little bit about evil altruism. We see a lot of people who are wealthy, people like Bill Gates, for example, trying to help others using their wealth. Do you support that?
So it's a good question. A lot of people sort of misunderstand the idea of selfishness versus altruism. And just to specify once more, selfishness, in my view, is virtuous. And what I mean by that, selfishness is an interest or sort of a devotion to one's own interests. Me killing someone else cannot truly be in my interest because of the long-term risk and sort of the punishment that I will incur for performing that action. Can't be in my interest. Can't be in my interest to violate someone else's rights. What is in my interest is to benefit people in society that will ultimately benefit me. If there's a homeless man that I see and he's really personable and has a great personality, very lively, if he wants to work for me, I have every incentive in the world to bring him on board and to give him the resources he needs to be successful if it's going to benefit my company or if it's going to benefit my personal life. As it pertains to charity, I don't think that like senseless giving is a good thing. Like, I don't think like, oh, I need to give to be socially considered, philanthropic. I'm going to give $1 million to charity X that has nothing to do with me. I don't think that, I think that's sort of self-sacrificial. But say that my sister has cancer. That's a whole nother story. Maybe I donate $1 million to a cancer research firm because now it's in my interest. I'd like them to find a cure. So ultimately, in some regard, any benevolent thing, any charity is in someone's interest. So it would be supported by someone. What wouldn't be supported is the violation of other people's rights, the violation of other people's wills. We're not going to subjugate other people to things they don't want to do. That's involuntary. That's against our nature.
We're coming towards the end of our time here. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your experiences with other people on TikTok and debating on TikTok, and also what you think that we can do to help educate people about about the political system, because you talked about how lots of people don't know what collectivism is and that how that's a problem. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on how we can let people know what that is to hopefully help move ourselves towards a better society.
Well, let me first start by answering the first part. My experience on political TikTok, I just sort of to give some background information. I've been involved in politics and philosophy in some capacity for the previous 7 years. I got on the political TikTok community in, I believe, middle of March of 2020, because I was bored in quarantine and I wanted to, discuss with some new people. Discuss policy, discuss principle with new people. And so I joined. TikTok sort of scared me because everything that I had read about TikTok was about how it was like Chinese malware and all this stuff. But I went for it, whatever. I figured what was the worst that could happen. The Chinese government already probably has all my information that they want on me. So that's sort of how I got into TikTok. The people on TikTok that I've met have been lovely. I've really not had any problems thus far, knock on wood. I mean, I don't want to jinx myself, but like people that I've met on political TikTok have all been great. I got involved with the Aporia Institute pretty early on. Back then, we were the classical liberal hype house. We had like 1,000 followers when I joined. Fast forward today, we're at 50,000. Just crazy to think about. So I've met a lot of new people in sort of that fashion. As it pertains to what we can do to educate more people, I think that's sort of what I'm trying to do now by doing this interview, by making political TikTok content, by putting content on Instagram, by posting reading suggestions, by doing all these things that I'm trying to do, going on YouTube, having the Aporia Institute YouTube channel, Twitter, Medium, I'm writing articles. That's sort of my mission now. I want people to hold these ideas that I view as virtuous. That's my goal. I want people to, think things that I think. I think the things that I think are great. I'd love if other people would think the same. I can't force anyone to think what I think, but I can certainly try to portray my ideas properly so that people understand them the same way that I do. I hope that answers your question as to what it is that we can do. I think that one of the most important things to grasping new ideas is reading. And I think that a lot of people don't read. And I think that in great part, we blame the American education system for this. We almost entirely read romance and fiction books in school, which I think is a really big error. I wish that there were more academic books in school, nonfiction, action books. The vast majority of books that we read are catered towards girls, actually. And this is something that Christina Hoff Sommers talks about at pretty extensive length. I wish that, when I was in lower school, middle school, whatever, the entirety of my early education, that I was exposed to more nonfiction. I wasn't really exposed to nonfiction until I was in middle school, and it was only because I wanted to be exposed to nonfiction. Ideas, principles. I wanted to be exposed to things that are rooted in reality. So I think that that's one concrete step that we can take towards, a more, I hate the word educated because I hate when like rad libs are all like, oh yes, oh that's on education, period. Like I despise it. But I do think that there is something to be said for more familiarity with ideas like individualism, like egoism, rational egoism, like capitalism, and above all, rationality.